You can pretend to be strong. You can wear the mask of confidence. You can even pull off a convincing act of kindness, drive, or discipline, at least for a little while. But there are certain things, very specific things, that always betray the truth. And Machiavelli, he saw through them all. See, he didn't live in a world where guessing who was real and who was fake was an option. He was surrounded by schemers, liars, pretenders. If he couldn't tell who was actually strong and who was just loud, he'd lose everything. So he got good. Very good. He noticed something most people don't. Weakness doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up screaming. It seeps out quietly through patterns. And those patterns, the weak never even realize they're showing them. But Machiavelli did. And when he caught a glimpse of them in a man, whether a rival, an ally, or even in himself, he knew he'd found something valuable. Weakness in his hands became an early warning signal, a secret tool, a way to protect his power before it ever came under threat. These signs, these behaviors, they aren't obvious. In fact, most people miss them completely. But not Machiavelli. He studied people like a wolf studies prey. He learned to see not just how men looked, but how they moved, how they reacted when the mask slipped. And there were 3 patterns that, once he spotted them, told him exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. Here's the first. Over-justification. It's more common than you'd think, and more revealing. See, strong men make decisions. Weak men explain them. It really is that simple. When a man keeps defending every action, rewording his thoughts, trying to make everyone around him understand he's not being honest, he's being scared. Machiavelli saw this all the time. In courts, in council chambers, in quiet corners where deals were whispered, the prince, the one who truly held power, he didn't explain. He spoke simply, confidently, and only when needed. But the merchant, the minister, the ambitious nobody who wanted to sound important, he never stopped talking. He needed everyone in the room to agree with him, because deep down, he didn't even agree with himself. That kind of man isn't aiming for power. He's aiming for approval. And that's the difference. Because approval is a cage, and the man who needs it will never be trusted to lead anything of real weight. When someone constantly repeats their point frames, it in the best possible light tries to sound noble or reasonable or charming, what you're hearing isn't strength, it's collapse. Slow motion collapse. And Machiavelli saw right through it. He called it what it was, a quiet plea for permission to exist. That's weakness. But that was only the first behavior. The second, it's colder and harder to catch. Weaponized niceness. This one wears a friendly face. But make no mistake, it's one of the most dangerous masks weakness can put on. Machiavelli knew this well. The most fearful men didn't always cower. Sometimes they smiled. They offered help. They went out of their way to seem nice. But it wasn't kindness, not real kindness. It was fear wrapped in sugar. Because real kindness, it's selective. It's intentional. It comes from strength. It doesn't bend at the cost of self-respect. But weaponized niceness, that's submission pretending to be virtue. The weak man tries to be agreeable all the time. He avoids disagreement not because he's thoughtful, but because tension terrifies him. He hands out compliments like candy, hoping for smiles in return. And when he should speak when it matters, he stays quiet. He'll say sorry even when he knows he's right, not because of guilt, but because of fear. And the moment this strategy doesn't work, when being agreeable doesn't buy him the validation he's looking for, he snaps. It's subtle, but it's there. Sarcasm, passive aggression, bitter little comments that slip through the cracks. Because his niceness was never real. It was a tactic. And when that tactic fails, the truth seeps out. Machiavelli had a word of warning about men like this. He once wrote, "A prince must know how to do wrong, but only use it when necessary." Meaning restraint is strength. But niceness born from fear, that's a liability. The man who always smiles, who never says no, who never stands his ground. That's the man who can't be trusted. Not because he's evil, but because he's empty. And when the pressure rises, when loyalty is tested, when boundaries are needed, he'll fold every time. Machiavelli watched for this compulsive friendliness like a hawk, because to him it was a telltale sign this man will break. He will retreat. He will betray. Not because he wants to, but because he can't help it. Now that brings us to the third behavior, the one Machiavelli couldn't stand, the one that made him look at a man and know instantly he's not just weak. He's dangerous. Display addiction. You've seen it. We all have. The man who always needs to be seen, who can't sit still without an audience, who posts constantly, talks louder than he needs to, turns every little success into a production. Machiavelli saw men like this everywhere. And what he realized was simple but chilling. These men aren't confident, they're terrified. Because the man who's obsessed with attention, he isn't chasing glory. He's running from disappearance. He believes that if he's not being praised, noticed, or talked about, he doesn't matter. And when the spotlight moves on, so does his identity. That kind of weakness, it's not circumstantial. It's not because he had a hard life. It's rot, identity rot. Because display addiction isn't drive. It's panic, the panic of someone with no center. These men, Machiavelli saw them as walking liabilities. Because if they need attention to feel alive, they'll do anything to get it. Lie, betray, expose secrets, start chaos, just to be relevant. And the worst part, they don't even realize it. In their minds, they're winning, they're admired. But the second the crowd leaves, they crumble. Machiavelli didn't waste time attacking men like this. He didn't argue, he didn't fight. He just turned off the spotlight. He withdrew the applause. He made them feel invisible. And then he watched as they unraveled. Because a man addicted to display, he's easy to predict, easy to manipulate, impossible to trust. While strong men work in silence, refine in private, and move without warning the weak man. He can't go 5 minutes without validation. He doesn't just want approval. He needs it like air. And that Machiavelli understood was far more dangerous than any sword or scheme. Because a wicked man has a purpose. A weak man, he has a hole, a vacuum. And whoever fills it first owns him. And that's the real danger, isn't it? Weakness that looks harmless on the surface. But underneath it's just waiting to be shaped, filled, controlled. Machiavelli feared those kinds of men more than he ever feared the loud ones. Not the villains, not the aggressors, but the hollow ones. Because here's what he realized. Weakness doesn't just break under pressure, it absorbs. Put the wrong influence near it, and that void starts taking shape. And once it does, it becomes something far worse. But Machiavelli didn't stop at identifying these patterns. That was just the beginning. He took it further. He turned them into tools. He didn't just see weakness. He used it. Because in politics, in war and trust, recognizing weakness early, that could be the difference between empire and collapse. Weak men don't break like glass. They melt, quietly, subtly. And if you've bet your kingdom on someone like that, by the time you realize it, it's already too late. So how did Machiavelli protect himself? He stopped being impressed by charm, by titles, by words. He started paying attention to behavior. Not the kind you show when people are watching, but the kind that shows up when they're not. When there's no applause, no praise, no one to impress. He studied silence. He studied tension. He studied what a man does when he's alone with his own choices. Because that's when the truth leaks out. The strong they build in that silence. They get sharper. They become more dangerous. The weak, they explain. They perform. They crumble. Once you know how to see it, once your eyes adjust to the real signs, you gain something most people never will. Discernment. The ability to see not who someone claims to be, but who they're going to become. The second things go sideways. That's how Machiavelli chose who to trust, who to work with, who to avoid, and most importantly, who to shape. Because he understood something most still don't. Weakness is more useful than strength when you know how to use it. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he didn't argue. He studied, he listened, and then he pulled the strings. Because a weak man doesn't want to be strong. He wants to be led. He just doesn't want to know he's being led. So Machiavelli gave him exactly what he needed. A little validation when he felt ignored. A nod of agreement when he seemed uncertain. A sprinkle of flattery when he needed it most. Not because he respected him, but because he saw how easy it would be to shape him. That's the Machiavellian way. It's not about strength, it's about direction. It's not about force, it's about influence. He would watch the justifier, the one who couldn't stop explaining himself, and instead of challenging him, Machiavelli would smile, nod, say that makes perfect sense. And just like that, the man would attach himself to him, desperate for more of that rare validation. Willing to defend him, support him, even spy for him, just to hear those words again. Because when you're addicted to being understood, the first person who gives you that feeling, you'll follow them anywhere. Then he'd turn to the people pleaser, the nice guy, always agreeable, always helpful. He'd give him a task, a role, something to feel chosen for. And suddenly that man wouldn't just work for him. He'd cling to him. Not because of loyalty, but because losing Machiavelli's approval would mean losing the only thing keeping his identity together. And the third type, the display addict, the performer, the man who needed to be seen. Machiavelli didn't scold him, he gave him the stage. Let him speak in meetings, take public credit, play the role of leader. But behind the scenes, Machiavelli was the one writing the script. Because he knew if you give a weak man the illusion of power, he'll never question who really has it. This is how you build control without ever looking controlling. Let their own insecurities build your palace. Let their need to be seen, to be liked, to be included, do the heavy lifting. And if one of them ever turns on you, don't panic, don't fight, just disappear. Withdraw the attention. Let them spiral in silence. Because nothing shatters a weak man faster than being ignored by the person who shaped him. That's the cruel beauty of Machiavellian psychology. You don't defeat your enemies. You let them defeat themselves. And you stay calm, stay quiet, stay still. Let them dance for the spotlight while you acquire power. But Machiavelli had one final rule, a rule colder than all the others. Never let a weak man believe he's your equal. Because the moment he does, he forgets who made him. He starts to dream about rebellion, about rising up, about standing next to you instead of behind you. And that's when things get dangerous. So you keep the distance. You give him just enough to keep him moving, but never enough to make him think he doesn't need you anymore. And if he ever tries to challenge you, you don't argue. You replace him. Because weak men are not in short supply. Validation addicts are everywhere. But there's only one of you. This is how real control works. Not through domination, not through fear, through understanding, through silence, through presence. Machiavelli knew the best manipulation doesn't look like manipulation at all. It looks like friendship, like mentorship, like a favor. Because weak men don't search for truth, they search for signals. Approval, attention, safety. And once you know that you can guide every part of their behavior without ever raising your voice. That's how Machiavelli moved through palaces, governments, alliances. Not by shouting orders, but by becoming the one they needed. He became the quiet listener to the over-explainer, the calm force behind the agreeable puppet, the ghostwriter for the man addicted to applause. And he let them keep their flaws. He didn't try to fix them. He fed them just enough to keep them loyal, keep them working, keep them desperate for his presence. And in return, he got obedience without asking. He got loyalty without earning it. He got power without ever appearing to reach for it. This is the essence of true Machiavellian control. Not the kind that storms in and takes power, but the kind that quietly becomes the axis everyone else rotates around, and they never even notice. See, most people think control looks like a throne, a crown, a raised voice. But real control, it's quiet, it's slow, it's invisible. It doesn't tell you what to do, it makes you want to do it. And the weak, they don't resist it, they crave it, they chase it. Because the truth is, they're not fighting for autonomy. They're fighting for belonging, for praise, for some signal that they're good enough. And if you can give that signal sparingly, strategically, you can own their behavior without ever owning them. That's the trick. Speak less than expected. Let silence do the heavy lifting. The weaker the man, the more he needs to be affirmed, reassured, validated. So you stay quiet. You let him spill everything. Let him reveal his insecurities in the space you didn't fill. And when you finally speak, it lands like thunder. Because now that simple compliment, that quiet nod, it feels earned. It feels rare. It becomes gold. They chase that feeling. Not because you gave them power, but because they want more of what only you seem to offer. And now they're not just cooperating, they're addicted. Then you become the stillness in their storm. Weak men live in emotional noise. They overreact. They spiral. They explain, then re-explain, then apologize. They're frantic when ignored and unhinged when corrected. So you don't do any of that. You become the opposite. You hold your ground. You move with quiet clarity. You react to nothing. And in the contrast, the gap between their chaos and your calm, they start to see something in you. Something they can't explain, but they start to trust. Or fear. Both work. They think he must know something I don't. He's in control. I should follow his lead. And now your influence doesn't need to be spoken. It's felt. And then you take it one step further. You reward with unpredictability. That's the twist most people miss. You don't become a vending machine for compliments. You don't hand out attention like candy. You become rare. Some days you acknowledge them. Other days you vanish. Sometimes you nod. Sometimes you walk past without even a glance. Why? Because inconsistency creates craving. And craving creates obsession. Now they're not just following. They're guessing. They're performing. They're talking about you to others, wondering what you think, chasing the high of your approval. You've stopped being a person. You've become an idea. And that's where the real psychological power begins. Because once they start needing your recognition, they start fearing your absence. Now you don't need to punish them. Your silence is punishment. You don't need to scold them. Your lack of attention is a mirror they can't stop staring into. And in that mirror, they see every crack they're trying to hide. You've got them. Not through fear, not through force, but through dependency. That's the true art of turning weakness into fuel.